Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. If you've been following the channel, you know I posted this video called Ranking the Top Disc Golf Companies. This video right here is one of the most popular videos I've ever posted on my channel. And I've recently been getting a lot of requests to make a new one because that video is over a year old. So in this video, I'm going to be re-ranking the best companies in disc golf. Let's go ahead and get into it. So last time I used a tier list. I'm going to go ahead and use that same ranking system for this video. If you haven't seen that video, basically how it works is an S tier is the best of the best and a D tier is the lowest tier. So I'm going to rank a number of disc golf companies, S being the best, D being the worst. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first company is Prodigy. Prodigy is an interesting company to talk about because since my last video, they have made a lot of changes. Obviously, their two best players, arguably Chris Dickerson and Katrina Allen, don't play for Prodigy anymore, and they kind of put all their chips on Kevin Jones and Gannon Buhr. And they have performed pretty well this year. They've come out with some new discs, and Prodigy overall is a really, really solid company. But I will say, Prodigy is so close to being a top-tier disc golf company, but for now, I'm going to have to put them in the A tier. They have a lot of things that make the company great, but I find the way they organize their discs can sometimes be confusing, and the one thing about Prodigy is their discs can sometimes be inconsistent. So if you were to buy a D2, for example, you could buy two different D2s, or two of the exact same D2s, and they would fly completely different. So that's the one thing with Prodigy that has kind of been the most negative thing about their company ever since they started, and so they're really solid. They made a ton of improvements, but I think they belong in the A tier. The next company is MVP, and this company has probably changed the most since I ranked them last. I made this ranking video before James Conrad hit the shot, before he won Worlds, before the Axiom Hex was released. And so MVP has released a lot of discs that have really improved their company and have allowed them to market their brand in a lot of different ways. And so MVP is going to make a big improvement compared to my last video, and I'm going to go ahead and put them in the B tier. I had them, I think, down either C or D in my other video, but they've made a lot of improvements. They've been able to market themselves really well, and they're on the right path to becoming a top brand in disc golf. I see a whole lot more people throwing the gyroplastic now than I did, 6 months ago. So they definitely are doing things right, and I think MVP's headed in the right direction. I don't think they're quite on Prodigy's level just yet, but I think MVP's going in the right direction. So I'm going to put them in the B tier. The next company is Discmania, and they've also changed a lot because in my last video, I talked about how the thing holding Discmania back was that Innova was making all their plastic. And so that's when COVID was hitting and all that. And so production had decreased for a lot of brands. And so now that Discmania is making their own plastic and has their own factory, I think they are definitely up into that S tier. Discmania is definitely a top tier company. They pretty much have it all. They have the marketability. They have the, really dominant pro team. They have the plastic. They really have all of it. And, as Discmania continues to be able to make more of their own discs, obviously their factory is still somewhat new, and so they're still manufacturing their originals molds in the new Italian plastic. But as they continue to do that and their discs become more available, I think Discmania is going to blow up, as is. They're a hugely popular brand. Very, very popular, and I think they're definitely one of the powerhouse companies in disc golf right now. So Discmania is definitely going to be in that S tier slot in my opinion, and I think they have a really, really high ceiling. I think that Discmania has perhaps the most potential out of any other brand on this list to be one of, if not the biggest brand in disc golf. But right now they're in the S tier, but I still think they have a ton more room to grow, and so Discmania is a really exciting brand to watch, and in my opinion, they're definitely an S tier brand in disc golf. So the next brand I'm going to talk about is Gateway. And when I was thinking about where I wanted to put Gateway, I thought about my last video that I made over a year ago, and I thought, what has changed with Gateway since I last made that video? And to be honest with you, I couldn't come up with much of anything that has changed. So for Gateway, I'm going to have to put them in the D tier again in this ranking. There really wasn't much that changed with the company. I know of a couple people who putt with Gateway Wizards, but other than the Wizard, I don't know of very many other molds. I don't know. Gateway's marketability isn't really very high. They have a few discs that are pretty good. They really don't have anyone major representing them on the pro scene. And so Gateway, I feel like, is on its last leg right now, in my opinion. I'm sure they have good discs, but they're just getting outdone by all the other companies. And I don't see Gateway, having just a resurgence at all. And so I'm going to leave them in the D tier. And unfortunately for Gateway, I don't see them, having a lot of room for improvement. But you never know. There is always, the opportunity for them to sign a player or have maybe new ownership or something like that to boost their brand. But for right now, I'm going to keep Gateway in the D tier. So yeah, Gateway, D tier company. All right, the next company is Infinite Discs. And this one is super, super interesting because Infinite makes a lot of their money selling discs on their online website, and they sell discs from all brands. But Infinite Discs also has their own discs. And I will say, Infinite Discs has made a lot of improvements since I last talked about them. They've signed a decent amount of players in their open bag lineup. They have Drew Gibson, they have Eric Oakley now, and so they have a lot of very marketable players. Their discs themselves, they've released a few new discs since I last talked about them, and their online shop is still one of the best places to go and buy discs. And so Infinite is just a really, really solid company, and I think that they have a really good spot in disc golf to where they can sell all discs and they can sponsor players to have an open bag. And I think that's something that's really unique to Infinite Discs, and I think that makes them a really, really solid and competitive company. So I'm going to go ahead and put Infinite in the B tier for my ranking. I think they're really, really solid, and I think they're right there with MVP, to be honest with you. They both have good marketable players, they both make good plastic, and overall, I think they're great brands, and I definitely see a lot more Infinite and a lot more MVP than I used to. And so both of those are pretty comparable in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and put Infinite in that B tier. The next company I'm going to talk about is Innova. And this is a really, really interesting one to talk about because since my last video, Innova is consistently kind of slowly declining. But when you look at the grand scheme of disc golf, Innova's the biggest name in disc golf, other than maybe Discraft and a few others that I'll talk about later. But Innova has been, they've been in the game the longest. They've been the face of disc golf for a very, very long time. When you go to those, big stores like Academy or Dick's Sporting Goods, there's always Innova in that disc section. And so with that said, you can't ignore the fact that Innova is one of the biggest brands in disc golf. And so I'm gonna put them in the S tier. That's where I had them in the last video. And although maybe their pro team is not what it used to be, and their popularity isn't what it used to be, I still think there are a lot of people throwing Innova, and you can't ignore the amount of beginner players and new players to disc golf who pick up disc golf for the first time and they immediately start throwing Innova. I feel like when you first start out, everyone has at least thrown Innova, and for that reason, they have to be a S-tier company. They've been in the game for a really long time. They have such a wide variety of discs, and their availability is awesome. You can pretty much go and find a T-Bird, an AVR, a Destroyer, whenever you want, wherever you want. And so Innova is a great option, and it's always something that you can rely on to go back and throw discs from their brand. And so for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and keep Innova in the S tier. That's where I had them in the last video. I think they're a really, really solid company, and I think Innova is just such a staple in disc golf that I have to put them in the S tier. The next company is Latitude 64. And in my last video, this is the one that was the most controversial. I put Latitude 64 in the S tier. And one of my reasonings for that was that they, at the time, were making a lot of Discmania's active line plastic, and that's primarily what Discmania was selling. So in a way, Latitude was helping keep Discmania alive at that point. And so now that Discmania is making their own discs and Latitude is focusing on their own discs, I feel like it's smart to put Latitude in the A tier, same level as Prodigy. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you really think about it, because Latitude has made a lot of improvements since I last talked about them. They released their new Royal line, which is really popular. They have the Rive, the Grace, the Hope, the Faith, a lot of new discs that a lot of people are really enjoying. Their pro team is still really solid. They have Kristen Tatar, who dominates the FPO division when she plays. And I think they're a really solid company. I think their plastic is some of the best feeling plastic in the game. Overall, I think Latitude is a fantastic brand. The only thing about Latitude and Trilogy in general is once they get all those discs availability up, I think that will be awesome because there are a lot of discs that aren't really made as much anymore in the Trilogy lineup, and I think that there are a lot of people who constantly talk about, missing the availability of certain discs, but that pretty much is the only thing I can think of when talking about negative about Latitude 64. They are a fantastic brand, they release great discs, and I think they're pretty much equal with Prodigy when you think about popularity and things like that, because Latitude and Prodigy, you can't forget, are very, very popular brands in Europe. And the European disc golf scene is huge, so you can't forget about those two brands being very popular in Europe as well as in the States. So I think those two brands belong in the A tier, and I think it's really, really fair to put Latitude in the A tier. The next company is Discraft. And I've been saying this for a while, like, I'm not a huge Discraft thrower myself, but in my most unbiased opinion, Discraft is definitely the fastest growing and most popular brand in disc golf right now. They have almost every big name player on their team. Their plastic is incredible. Their availability is awesome. I see so many people throwing Discraft. It's hard to go out to a local course and not see people throwing buzzes and zones. They're in about every casual player's bag. And so Discraft is the most obvious S tier company. They may be the best company in disc golf right now. And it's hard to find difficult things to say about Discraft. I mean, the only thing that Discraft really doesn't have is, I would say, Innova and maybe a few Trilogy discs can be more suitable for beginners, but at the same time, Discraft has very good discs for beginners as well. But once you get into disc golf, I feel like everyone discovers Discraft and starts throwing their discs because they are so good and they're great discs. Their availability is awesome. They have a good pro team. Like I said, it's hard to find negative things to say about Discraft. I think it's the most popular brand in disc golf right now. So I'm going to put Discraft in the S tier. I think it's definitely one of, if not the top company in disc golf right now. And so Discraft is an obvious S tier for me. Let me know what you guys think about Discraft in the comment section down below. The next company is Westside. And Westside has changed a little bit too since I last talked about them. They had Nico Lacastro, now they have Matt Oram. And I think Matt Oram's a great person to represent Westside. And I think with the addition of some big names to dynamic discs, I think Westside has grown along with the Trilogy family. So I'm going to go ahead and put Westside in the B tier. I think Westside is a fantastic, fantastic company. I throw quite a few discs from Westside and I really, really enjoy them. The only negative thing about Westside is their availability is pretty poor. It's hard to find a lot of discs from Westside unless you throw, the Harp or maybe like the King and a few distance drivers. It's really hard to find some specific Westside molds. But other than that, if you can find the molds are fantastic. And so as Trilogy is growing, Westside is growing. But when you look at the whole Trilogy brand, Westside is definitely the smallest of the three companies. So I think it suits them well to put them in the B tier. Really great company, really great discs, a lot of room to grow. I think Westside's fantastic. I'm going to put them in the B tier. All right, sticking with the Trilogy lineup, we'll go on to dynamic discs. And dynamic discs maybe has changed the most since I last talked about them. My biggest critique of dynamic discs last time was their lack of a big presence on their pro team. They've signed a number of players, especially adding Ricky Wysocki, one of the top names in disc golf. Dynamic has definitely boosted in their ability to advertise their discs and kind of work through Ricky Wysocki to sell a lot more plastic. They've also announced a bunch of new discs releasing as well, and Dynamic has definitely improved in just almost every aspect of their brand. And Dynamic, along with Innova, are one of very few companies who have allowed themselves to be in those big name brand stores like Academy Sports and things like that. And so when you go in there, you often see Innova and Dynamic discs as well. And so having that aspect, it's just a no-brainer to put Dynamic in the S tier. They're just a fantastic company. And I feel like whenever I started out with Dynamic, my bag is still primarily Trilogy. It's what I started out on. And I think there's just such a good variety for all different levels of players. The Trilogy really appeals to beginners really well, but they also have discs that you can kind of learn along the way. So you can start out with Dynamic, but you can also stick with Dynamic, as you develop as a disc golfer. And so I think that's a really strong aspect of the company. I think it's definitely a no-brainer to put them in the S tier, and I think Dynamic has a lot of room to keep growing as well. And so I think Dynamic is a very, very solid company, and it's definitely one of my favorites in disc golf. So let me know what you guys think about Dynamic down below. I know there are some mixed opinions about the company, but I really love it. I mean, there's not much more to say about Dynamic. But yeah, I feel really confident in my opinion to put Dynamic in the S tier, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So, Dynamic Discs, S tier company. The next company is Castoplast. And this is a really difficult one for me every single time I make this video, because Castoplast is just so unique, and they're not like any other company, because really the disc that puts Castoplast on the map is the Castoplast Berg. But the thing about the disc is it's such a controversial disc, because the people who love the Berg would do anything. They would like die for that disc. They love it so much. They're obsessed with the Berg. But then a lot of people don't like the disc. And so that's definitely just an argument over Castoplast, but their other discs are good as well. They have good plastic, but it's just so hard to figure out what Castoplast really is as a company to me. And so, because they don't really have a huge presence on the Pro Tour, you maybe will see an occasional player at your local course throwing a Berg or something like that, but it's such a niche company to me, and it's such a smaller company that I'm going to put Castoplast in the C tier. I know they make good discs, and I know they have a certain audience, but I don't think that audience is large enough to put them in a higher tier. I think it's a really specific audience that Castoplast caters to, and so I think as they grow with their company and get a larger audience in disc golf, they will progress as a company. But for right now, I think they belong in the C tier, and I think they have a lot of room for improvement. But yeah, I think it's fair to put Castoplast in the C tier. You may disagree, but I think that's where they belong. And the last company, I didn't include this company in my last tier list video, but it is almost essential to put this company in this one, and that is DGA. DGA has changed a whole lot. They added Katrina Allen and Andrew Marweed to their pro team. They've released a lot of new discs, and with the addition of a lot of players to Discraft who are allowed to throw DGA, it's really put them on the map. Chris Dickerson bags discs from DGA. Katrina Allen really winning a ton of tournaments this year, putting DGA on the map. I think it's a it's really incredible to look at how much the brand has grown. So I'm gonna go ahead and put DGA in the B tier for companies. I think DGA and Westside are really similar companies, because DGA has a few discs that players from Discraft will throw and are really popular. Westside has the Harp and a few other discs that Dynamic and Latitude players really like throwing. And I think as they develop their own company and their own discs and get that availability up and really market them as their own individual company and their own individual discs, and use their big touring pros to help do that, I think Westside and DGA alike will be able to grow. But I think putting those on equal tiers is really fair in my mind. So DGA, B tier company. I actually have seen people throwing DGA, which, a year ago I couldn't really say that. So I think it's a really interesting company. I had to include them on this one just because of the amount of changes, but DGA, B tier company. All right, that wraps it up for my ranking of the best companies in disc golf. I know there are definitely a lot of you who agree with mine, and probably even more who disagree with this list. So definitely let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree with what I said? There are a lot of comments on my last video, so I assume there'll be a lot of comments on this video as well. Let me know what you think. I think it's a really interesting topic to debate in disc golf. So let me know, what do you think? What's your favorite company, least favorite company? All that good stuff. We can have a good conversation about that in the comments. But that is it for this video. If you stayed to this point, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. But yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.